the reason why they choose to be selfless is because the opposite is self-acceptance. Welcome to the Living Richly podcast. My name is Rob Dale, and I'm here with my great friends Trevor Mundven and Eric Deschamps, and we have been exploring the idea of what does it mean to live your best life. And hopefully you were able to tune into some of the other podcasts, some of the other episodes. And last time we really were kind of using the language that it mattered. We were talking about creating your best life. We've begun to look at some of the elements that we are using. And we made it pretty clear during that last episode that we don't have all the answers, that there are probably many different
People
ways.
may be shocked by that.
Yeah, no.
Oh, wait, no one would be.
No, they wouldn't be shocked.
But that there could be all kinds of different ways to get to that place of living your best self. We have a model or a way or an approach that we are going to be exploring over the next number of episodes. One thing, though, that I think we all agree on that is absolutely essential, dare I say, you cannot get to a place where you are living your best life until you first get here. And that is, and I love the language that we've used in previous episodes of this idea of this radical self-acceptance.
Massive.
It is absolutely. So first thoughts, when I say the words radical self-acceptance, what comes to mind for you guys?
A couple of things. One is that I think over time it's becoming more clear that self-acceptance should be the single most natural thing ever. Right. And I think
interesting that you use the word natural there.
And I think we put the word radical in front of it because I think we live in a world that does not encourage that to happen at all. It's if you're doing it, people are like, oh, look at that. Like there's a lot of negative attitude that goes towards someone who said, yeah, I really love myself, because I think we're in a system designed to say you shouldn't love you. You're not enough, right? Whatever you're doing, could you give a little bit more, right? How many people do we say, oh yeah, I give 110% in everything I do? I'm like, why would you do that? Right? It's a waste of energy. They're probably, it's usually a lack of judgment about what needs energy and what doesn't, but they feel like it has to be on everything all the time in order to just be enough. So anyone who's prepared to say, I love me, I accept me the way I am, I'm enough just as I am, suddenly seems radical.
Right. It seems extreme compared to what we experience on a daily basis. And as we were preparing for this episode, just the conversation around, to your point, this being the one thing that is so crucial. The one thing.
I knew you'd do it.
Was that City Slickers?
That's City Slickers, Billy Crystal, trying to find the meaning of life.
Show notes.
Hey, ask Jack Palance what's the secret to being living a happy life, and Jack Palance answered the one thing, Billy.
Here it is.
The one thing. This is in our from our perspective, and I would say in our own shared experience, personally, and in our shared experience, the three of us, that how can you move to putting yourself first? If radical self-care would be the next sort of, if you accept yourself first and you start to take better care of yourself, putting yourself first more often in life, and that in itself is another step towards then becoming the best version of you, which would be that self-actualization, right? Like bringing your best self forward. How can you take any of those two later steps if you haven't taken the first one? If you don't believe that you're worthy of investing time and energy in, why would you invest in self-care? If you don't believe that you are worthy, or if you have a very low opinion of yourself, if you're not accepting who you are and have a very critical self-view, how could you possibly put your best life forward, or create your best life and put your best self forward? That runs in total opposition to that position, and you can't, no matter how hard you try. None of us can sustain actions that are contrary to our core beliefs for any length of time. We can modify behavior temporarily, but we cannot transform until we change our thinking. That's where the transformation starts.
So we talk about, again, what society, kind of how we look at this, and it's not really as natural as we'd like. Certainly when I think of, when people talk about self-acceptance early on, before I began this journey, was kind of like, that's just some of that kind of the granola crunching kind of like foo-foo, right? It was just kind of like, come on, like what is...
Wait, what?
You know what I mean.
The granola crunching foo-foo.
What are you eating?
Like, where did that come from? Silliness, right? It was just kind of like, come on, and even society. I mean, there are certain things that certainly in a North American society that we seem to, as a culture, value. We value hard work. We value sacrifice.
Results.
We value results. And
performance.
We value performance, but we also value, it seems, selfishness, selflessness. The idea of being able to, I'm going to give of myself for others, and we kind of, and so then
I'd rather burn out than rust out, right?
Yeah, exactly. All of these sayings, and in a sense, is radical self-acceptance seems like at a surface level to be in contradiction to that.
Well, it actually is.
Yeah.
It actually is a complete
100%.
contradiction to that. And, coming from the background that, all three of us did in one way or another, the notion of self-sacrifice, the notion of selflessness is held up. Those things are held up as pretty important virtues. They're almost like right there with godliness. And yet, and for years, I embraced selflessness as a goal, something I strived for. And to the point where,
your goal was to not be,
selflessness, the very definition is to have no sense of self. So shorten that, no self. So imagine living your whole life with no true sense of self. Yeah. You're putting the needs of everyone else ahead of your own, to your own detriment, and that only feeds your belief that you don't deserve it, that you don't matter, that your voice doesn't matter, your needs don't matter, your wants don't matter, that it's all about living for other people. And we're not by any means suggesting on this podcast, and yes, you're listening to three guys talk about self-compassion. Shocker. It doesn't happen very often. But we have this notion again of we're living for other people and we're not living true to ourselves. And as a result, we pay a pretty heavy price for that. It's only when we begin to understand that actually being selfless is actually selfish, because in an act of trying to help others or put others first, you show up as half a person or a fraction of yourself. When you practice self-care, which is a natural outflow, when you begin to truly accept yourself for who you are and begin to embrace your own worthiness and affirm your own value as a human being, flawed and in some ways limited and with gaps and the good, the bad, and the ugly, when you begin to embrace all of that and begin to put yourself first, you actually show up better in every single role, responsibility, relationship, result. You bring actually a better version of you forward. So selflessness and what we're talking about definitely run. I'm not talking about there are certainly moments where being selfless, self-sacrifice are required, but living as a way of life, it's problematic. It's very problematic.
I wonder, listening to how you explain that, the thought that came to mind was this is why, for a lot of people, the reason why they choose to be selfless is because the opposite is self-acceptance.
Right.
And it's like you were saying things, you can't bring the fullest version of you. You're only bringing half of you. Well, that's good because nobody wants all of me anyway. Nobody wants the full me. We have these ideas and these scripts that say, well, I don't have anything to bring. So I'll just bring I'll bring less self.
Right. Right.
And we've created all these scripts around why then being selfless is such a wonderful virtue. And it's almost as a defense mechanism to the fact that we don't have an acceptance of who we are.
Right, right. And I think all of us could testify to this wrestling with this issue in our own personal lives of beliefs that we held about ourselves that were very self-defeating. We've talked about it, each of us in our own way, as we told our story in previous episodes. But I'm wondering for you guys, like, how did that show up? This sense of the struggle with this whole notion of coming to a place of accepting self. Where did you come from, and what were some of the key things that helped you move from a place of where you didn't accept yourself fully to now perhaps accepting yourself more fully?
Oh, stop looking at me.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right.
You got this.
Right. So this is one where this is work in progress for me, without a doubt. There are good days and there are less good days. But I think for a long time, it showed up as a frustration. And the frustration was no matter what I did, I still felt out of whack and I couldn't put my finger on it. So I used the only move I had or felt I had, which was to work harder.
Right.
And that just exacerbated the problem. I think when it really started to shift was kids really actually helped with that, because suddenly you find yourself saying to your kids, I think, the truths that you need to hear for yourself. And there's like a little discomfort that starts to show up because you hear yourself saying it to them, saying, hey, it's okay. You made a mistake. It's not your identity. You just made a mistake. And that makes you very human. And yet when I make a mistake, that's not the message I'm giving myself, which is, hey, you're just human and it's okay. No problem.
Yeah. Right.
And I think that actually, that gap started to make it more clear to me going, why aren't I saying that? Right. And we've talked before about Dr. Sherry, who we've all worked with. She's amazing. We'll put a link in the show notes. Go find Sherry. And about that notion about how are you speaking to you?
Yeah.
And why would you speak to you that way? So in some ways for me, it's not even about trying to love myself better than anyone else right now. I'm just trying to love myself equally to maybe how I love others. And maybe at another point I'll kind of go, maybe I've got a little bit of a privileged spot because I'm me and I know me better. But that's, maybe heading in that direction. But I think, that piece for me has been huge around how do I find a little bit more compassion in my when I point it at me. Right, all these things we do externally. Yeah. Right. How supportive are we prepared to be? Right. You talked about being selfless and being there and supportive with others. Right. I think very often, we kind of go selfless one and selfish at the other. If I'm not being selfless, I'm being selfish. Kind of going, boy, I think there's a massive gap in between those two. And that's where, self-acceptance, there's a lot of room for that to live. And so it's trying to spend a little bit more time, I think, in that space and really trying to shift my thinking as I do it.
Right.
Yeah, I think for me, it was, it's interesting that I talk about this in the podcast, in the episode where I share my story. I talk about the idea that even, my mom when she, before she passed away, wrote letters and talked about me being, you're the peacekeeper. You're the one I don't need to worry about. And I know that for me, most of my life, that was a script of I'm the bridge builder. I'm the one that and so where I matter when I can come in and support and help others and bring people together and help resolve issues, all of that kind of stuff. And so the notion of what my needs were, and that, I would get fiercely, probably angry at myself if I I wouldn't push for that. I never did, and never had that voice to say, "Hey, I have needs," or "I have," and felt silly or that felt like I was being unfair or whatever if I did speak up for that. Because for me, everything, this notion of the idea of self-acceptance. No, I am accepted when I show value to others by serving them and supporting them. This idea of self-acceptance, because then how do I serve myself and support myself? Well, I can't. So therefore I'm not accepted. Right. So that was the idea, the scripts that were there. I think certainly as I started to work through, so, hey, no, wait a minute. My needs matter. What I care about matters. It doesn't matter if, someone else thinks it's foolish or silly. It's what matters. And the more I began to say, okay, how do I express that in a way that is still it's where I'm expressing the true what I have, and accepting myself at that level. That's when this journey began for me, certainly of being able to say, okay, I do matter. And I need to start by, I think I said this in that podcast. I don't need somebody else to value me, because I found a way now to say, no, I accept me. If you accept me, great. If not, oh well.
Right. I can still relate to that one. I mean, one of my scripts for a long time, and this one is still a bit of a work in progress for me, has less power than it ever did, but it still, from time to time, holds some sway. And that is that I'm pretty useful to have in your corner. Like, I'm a pretty useful guy. I'm pretty resourceful, helpful, giving. So, convince myself that I'm useful, but not terribly likable.
Right.
Not terribly lovable. So, again, I find my worth or my value in doing good things for others, but really at the end of the day, that's about it. I'm like a tool in your toolbox, that favorite hammer you go to, when you gotta, to a hammer, everything's a nail. I get that. But this whole notion of, again, usefulness versus, being lovable, likable. And that reminds me of a book that Sherry did introduce to us. We'll make sure to link that in
Kelly
today's
Flanagan's
show.
book,
Kelly
right?
Flanagan's, Lovable, it's called.
It's a very disturbing
Very
book.
disturbing book.
Really good book.
It's very good. And I think all three of us, it played a significant role in our transformation along this front, our growth on this front, ongoing growth. I loved how you called it a work in progress, because I think many of these are a work in progress for all of us.
That was an act of real generosity to myself, being able to, I think I can do. Yeah, I'm gonna do. I did it.
I did it yesterday. But he introduces Flanagan introduces a really interesting concept. I mean, all three of us are executive coaches, leadership coaches. We work with leaders all the time. So I remember when I first started reading the book, and he talked about three sort of basic human needs, right? The need to feel worthy, that you are enough. And that's really what we're talking about here today. The need to be in relationship, right? To find your people, to be loved, and to love back. And third, the need for purpose, that your life matters and that you're making a difference. And I remember reading that and saying, yeah, duh. It's not news to me.
Wow.
I know this to be
Newsflash.
true.
Then he made it really uncomfortable.
Yeah, because then he said the sequence matters, and I'm like, what do you mean the sequence matters? And he goes on to lay out that actually, if you don't settle the worthiness question first, if you don't give, and the only person who can settle that question is you. I have to settle the worthiness question within myself. I have to affirm my worth, and if I don't do that, I'm going to chase that sense of worthiness and value in the other two. I'm going to chase it in every relationship, putting really unrealistic expectations on others to be my primary caregiver, and to affirm me and make me feel good about myself, which is totally unfair to do to anybody else. Or I'm going to chase it in my work, right? In what I do, in trying to make a difference and to add value. And I remember that just stopped me dead in my tracks, because I'm like, holy shit, I have been living in 2 and 3, running after a sense of validation that I'm okay. Please, someone tell me I'm okay. That was most of my adult experience. Chasing it in relationships, chasing it in the work that I did. And when I wasn't getting it, just double down and do even harder, do more. And this whole notion of the definition of insanity, doing more of the same, expecting a different result, it just wasn't working. And when he backs up, he says, when you can give yourself and affirm your own worthiness and settle that question. And to our point, I think it's a question you continue to settle over time. I don't think it's ever, completely settled, but the more we are able to look ourselves in the mirror and be okay with who we see there, then we bring a better version of ourselves to all of our relationships, and our relationships are enhanced, and our work, what we do on a day-to-day basis, is enhanced. The difference we can make is enhanced. Why? Because we're showing up as a fuller expression of our authentic self.
Well, and again, this is why we go back to when we say this is the one thing, when this is the foundational.
Rob.
No, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it.
You're doing it. Come on.
Nope.
Do it with me.
Nope.
The one thing.
No, stop it.
That sounded great, Rob.
Yeah. So
Everyone thinks
good
you
job.
know.
Yeah,
you did
exactly.
great.
Yeah.
You're really coming along.
The one thing.
Not even close.
What I love about the fact, as we say this as being the one thing, that this is the foundational piece. You cannot take this journey until you get here. It's not that I so appreciate, it's not that you have to have this completely figured out to take the journey. You have to at least be at a point where you say, hey, you know what? I deserve, or I am worthy of taking this journey.
Right. Oh, that's powerful.
And right, it's that starting point has got to be, or else if you come into this and go, well, I don't even deserve to live richly because I'm a rotten person. Okay, well then that's going to be the experience.
Yeah.
To be able to take this journey. Now, let me ask one last thing before we kind of jump into a little bit of the how do we do this, some of this stuff. What do you say to the person who listens to someone talk about, I'm learning to accept myself, I'm learning to be okay, who says, well, that's just narcissistic?
I would say that person doesn't understand what a narcissist is.
Okay.
Right.
I would say it caringly, but it's not narcissism. This is where we have to avoid kind of black and white distinctions between things, right? And to recognize we're not talking about two-dimensional things. We're talking about really complex spaces. So caring for yourself and about yourself doesn't mean you don't care about others,
That's
right?
exactly right.
Because what's interesting is most people are doing the opposite, which is caring about everyone else and not caring about themselves.
Right.
So it's the either or, right? And we're big fans of the and both, and most people are excluding themselves. Right? They're excluding the critical character of their own story and their own life from every circumstance when they're saying, I'm not going to care for that character. Everyone else deserves it or needs it, but not me.
Yeah. And I think that's thank you, because that's where I was going with that, is this idea that
No, I got it right.
you did great. You did a good job.
Cool start.
He gets a cookie.
Think about even the background we came from. You know, it's said that Jesus at one point, when he was asked what the greatest commandment is by some religious people, he answered, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And then he makes an interesting comment. He says, love others as you love yourself. And I remember for years, I could not figure out what that meant. Love others as you love yourself. And I realize now I couldn't understand that concept because the notion of loving myself was so far from my experience. I talk about the deep self-loathing and the harsh, cruel inner critic that I lived with for so many years that I created. My own my own choices, my own beliefs created this state where I couldn't look myself in the mirror and like what I saw. And so I think people need to come face to face with this reality that many of the beliefs that we have about ourselves are simply false.
Right.
They're based on maybe partial evidence. There may be partial evidence that supports their point of view, but I think if you look at the bigger picture, there's other evidence that would also counter some of those beliefs that they hold about themselves.
The thing with beliefs is a belief is anything we repeat.
Right.
It's actually not about evidence. It's about repetition. Right. That's how advertising works. Right? Consistent message to a consistent audience, because if you say it enough times, people believe it, right? So that's literally why that exists. And it happens internal at a core psychological level. Whatever we're going to repeat is what we're going to believe, which is really daunting in one sense and really liberating in another. Because it's daunting because we start to clue into all the things we keep saying to ourselves. Right? You talk about we kind of created this. There's like a passive creation in our life. And I think as we step into a richer life, there's an active creation of our life, right? So there's these things where sometimes it's an off comment from a teacher when we're a kid going, you're slow. And we just grab onto that and go, well, yeah, but I'm slow. And then the brain will start to align evidence to support that or not, depending on what we say to ourselves. So we've got room to reorder what that looks like. But sometimes, right, it's a terrifying notion, right? If we go back to Kelly Flanagan, like I was gutted when I read that, right? Kind of went, hey, find set your purpose. I'm like, yep, I got my 5-year plan. I got all that. How many 5-year plans I've had? Well, a lot. It feels like you start to live that out. Your people will show up, as you said, that connection, and then you get that sense of worth out of it. And it's and he said, okay, so this is how it flows. I'm like, yes, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And that's when he turns the tables and goes, yeah, you're performing for worth. And I was like, oh. And then he said, you need to anchor into that worth. Then your people will show up. Hello, people.
Hello.
And then our purpose will actually start to truly reveal itself to us. But to do that, what we have to shift is that belief, and to have the courage to let go of beliefs we've had for a long time just because we've been repeating them, and challenge them with evidence, right? Challenge them and say, if you put 100 people in a row, or, a jury of your peers, could you make the case? Could you make the case?
Right.
One of them for me was, I'm not smart enough. And too long, like, I have to work harder because I'm not smart enough. I got to do all this stuff. And then one day I was like, is that actually true? Right. So there's that curiosity kind of kicking in a little bit. And I started to go, actually, I'm not sure if that's true. And then over a bit of time, it's like, actually, that's not true. But that's not enough.
Right.
Because the repetition of a belief forms a neural pathway. Right. And the brain is lazy. The brain will go wherever there's a nice clean path, right? The more you say it, the bigger the pathway, the faster it fires, the easier, the more automatic it is. Right?
Well, think of walking through a forest. Are you going to blaze your own trail, or are you going to follow the trail that's already there?
Exactly.
That's how the brain works.
Exactly.
It wants to follow the trail that's been already established.
Yeah. And it's based on reinforced messages over years and years. So it feels safe and easy and all of that stuff. But if we don't have an alternative path to go down with the brain, it'll keep going back to that one. Right. So the realization to say, well, that belief isn't true, is the first critical step. But the next one is you need a counter message.
Right.
Right. And I think that's actually a radical act.
Right.
Is to say, I am going to develop a new belief. But I'm going to do it grounded in evidence. I'm going to do it grounded in reality. I'm going to do it grounded in self-acceptance and realization. And that's what I'm going to anchor into. And then it really is about repetition. We have to find opportunities to keep saying it to ourselves day in, day out, in the same way we've been doing the other messages day in and day out. And people go, I can't repeat it that long. I'm like, you spent your whole life doing exactly that. You can do it.
You've been meditating in a negative way for so long that now we're just talking about meditating on a different message. And yet it sounds simple, and yet the process is not easy, right? When we think of just how negative our self-talk can be, how we talk to ourselves in a way, for most folks, I think this is true.
What is it, like 80% of what we say today is the same as yesterday, and 90% of that is negative?
Right.
Like, it's internet data. That could be.
I think Abraham Lincoln said that. I think that was as Abraham Lincoln always said. But the truth is, whatever the statistics are, when you think of your self-talk, how much of it is encouraging, empowering, affirming versus negative and critical and putting yourself down and cutting yourself down and selling yourself short. Part of the work of transforming that is starting to pay attention to those messages, starting to not just let them flow through your brain, sort of as an automatic response, right? But rather pay attention to this. That's interesting. I'm thinking this thought. This is, and you're gonna. We talk about scripts and superscripts. When you start to pay attention, you're going to notice that there are some similar themes that show up. I mean, one of mine was that I'm fatally flawed. That I'm different from everybody else. That everyone else is worthy of a second chance and grace and forgiveness, but not me. I fuck everything up, right? Everyone leaves me was another one, right? I mentioned another one earlier, that I'm useful but not terribly lovable. I mean, these were all recurring themes that really formed the essence of what I truly believed about myself. And so no matter how much I tried to act contrary to that, I would have moments of it where I would try to modify my behavior, but the beliefs would pull me right back in. It's another great illustration would be we off-road with our Jeeps, and often when you're in an off-road situation, vehicles that have gone ahead of you have made deep ruts, in the mud or in the road. Try not falling into those ruts as you're driving.
Right.
Even if you try to go, it just wants to pull you back in, and that's what in many ways, our ruts are those negative beliefs that we have that if we're not deliberate, we're just going to keep falling back into them, and they are going to determine our behavior and how we show up in the world.
And
shadow forces.
I love what you said earlier about sounds so easy, right? I
wish there was an easy button for that one.
Yeah, I do too. And this is while I believe you can rewrite those scripts on your own, this is where the power community comes in, because oftentimes we don't even realize we're saying them. We say them so often, they've just become almost phrases. How many, and for those listening, how many of you, you say it or you hear other people say it all the time? Oh, I'll fuck my life.
Right.
Right. Is a real kind of just, it's like, okay, is that really the script that you want to continue to go on? And I think the notion of community when it comes to these scripts, we often don't even realize we're saying them until somebody else kind of challenges that thinking. I remember going through a difficult time. It was after I'd ended my second marriage, and a lot of stuff that had gone on there. And I remember, in tears, kind of just saying, well, I'm just broken. And that was a script that I had, I'm just broken. I'm not able to love properly. I don't know how to love. I don't know how to, all of this kind of stuff. And I think it was you that said to me, the three of us were together, but I think it was you that kind of, it was one of the few times that I felt like you almost got mad at me. And
I'm
it's
not
hard.
very supportive in a time of crisis.
It was so good.
Was that rage that showed up?
It was soft rage.
Soft rage.
Loving rage. Loving, nurturing rage.
Well, you actually said stop using that language.
That sounds like me in that
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
But it wasn't rage. It was a friend listening to another friend believing a lie and coming to his rescue in that moment, right? To challenge the thinking out loud. And community is such a powerful thing. I remember when I tell my story in one of the earlier episodes, I talk about when Jim Harrington, my mentor, invited me to Houston, right? For those few days. I was in such a bad place. I'd have been ignoring his email for months because I was ashamed about the state of my life and was embarrassed to let my mentor that I hadn't spoken to in 10 years to say, this is where I'm at right now. And when I finally reached out to him, he invited me to come down for a few days, and we had a number of very powerful, life-altering conversations. But I remember at one point he was coming up against this very cynical self. He was coming up against my inner critic and how I was talking about myself. And at one point, he simply wanted to affirm me. He says, "Eric, you're a really good man. You're a good man."
Right.
And I looked right back at him and I said, "No, I'm not." He says, "Yes, you are." And I'm like, "No, Jim, I am not. I don't believe it." And I was so firm in my position that I am not a good person. I'm not a good man. And he said, "It's okay, Eric. I know you don't believe it. So I'm just going to keep believing it for you and reminding you until you can accept it for yourself." I don't think you can actually overcome some of these superscripts and really negative beliefs about yourself in isolation. You need people around you who are going to challenge it and affirm you and love you and support you as you begin that journey. And I know that can be hard to hear because for the longest time I felt very, very alone. And to have heard someone say to me, "Well, you need help to do this," might have just made it feel worse. So if you're listening and that's you, listen, you're never as alone as you think you are. And that's even true. If in this current context, maybe this podcast is a place for you to just hear some things that are going to encourage you along. There are people in your life that will help you reach out, but it starts with, again, right, like being willing to be open a little bit.
One, I think, and I would say also that one of the starting points, if you don't have that community, you can't pinpoint that person or those individuals, a starting step, a starting point can be even just to write down, to journal, 100%. Right? So to write out those thoughts as they come to you so that you can see them kind of glaring back up at you from that paper, from the, screen, however you're putting it, because there's those, until it passes through the lips or the fingertips, it isn't real.
Right. It's not clear.
It's not clear. And for us to be able to look at that and go, okay, now that I see it in print, I've written it out. Now you can, is this true? What's the evidence for this? Right. There's some things you can do. So powerful, and I'm a big community is where you're going to really be able to explore some of those things. A great place, if that's not available to you right now, is at least journal out what are some of the things you're telling yourself when they come up. Take a second and quickly write them out somewhere, type them out on a note on your phone, but get them out of your head onto something that you can now look back on and begin to explore.
Yeah. Right, because you are not your thoughts.
Right.
You and your thoughts are not the same thing. And there is in almost observing them, in writing them down and observing them, I think you'll come to realize how sometimes some of them clearly will seem like distortions.
Yeah.
That there's really very little evidence to back that up. Some of them you'll feel pretty convinced, but at least you'll know what you're dealing with. And to your point, this is where now you begin to choose a different path forward. You begin to. I remember again early on in this work being asked to write down 20 positive affirmations. My self view was so bad, like I like in deep self-loathing. So the notion of someone saying write 20 things, 20 I am statements that are positive, I think I got to maybe 3 and then I froze. I couldn't come up with any more. But that initial list, I would keep coming back to it. And with encouragement, I'd keep coming back. And sometimes I would stray 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right?
Yeah.
And then I'd come back to it. And over time, I was just actually in preparation for today's show, I was reading back. I've got a list now of affirmations that, they're affirmations, but.
Can you give us a couple examples?
Yeah. I mean, one example is, instead of I am fatally flawed, I'm a deeply complex and interesting individual.
Oh, wow.
Right. Which is a complete shift, right? That
I think if you put 100 people in a row, they'd agree with that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Right? I affirm my sense of humor. Interesting thing is I've always been a funny kid. I can still remember, growing up, one of my favorite comedians, or the shows was the Carol Burnett show or the Tim Conway and, who was the guy?
You're that old.
Reruns, dude. Reruns.
Okay.
But I don't know if you remember that Tim Conway would do the old man. He'd do his old man shtick. And I used to do an impersonation of that and make everybody laugh. And so I was always the kid that would make people laugh. But then people say, oh, Eric, you're too loud and you're too big of a personality and you need to dial it down. And to the point where I learned, like, I was so conflicted about my own, how I showed up in social situations that here I am, a pretty confident guy normally socially, and I was always second guessing myself at every dinner party, at every social outing. Was I too much? Was I too little? Right. And so being able to just come to a place where I say I'm a funny person who brings joy to the world, and it's part of the gift that I bring, and just embrace that fully. So it's when you begin to recognize what is the junk that runs through your mind in those moments of self-doubt, of anxiety, of inner conflict, paying attention to the messages, and jotting them down. And then again, just to get present to what are the shadow forces? What are the things that are going on in the shadows of my life that keep pulling strings on my behavior? And I'm not suggesting that you're powerless here. Remember, your thoughts are your own.
Yeah.
You choose them. You believe them. So as long as you see yourself as a victim in this process, you won't make any progress. What I came to realize is I'd become very lazy in my thinking. I was letting my thoughts just run away on these.
It's also
negative
safe,
paths.
though, right? So those thoughts we learn to live with.
Right. Better the devil I know,
exactly,
than the devil I don't. Right.
Yeah. For me, 17 sentences, 17 thoughts were running my life.
Wow.
Right. And so, there's probably another 170 I haven't found yet.
I guess
but
17. Wait, let's get the list.
Okay,
we're going to post the list in the show notes, by the way.
Yeah.
We're not.
Can I ask you what one of them was? Can you give an example again so that
sure? And
understand?
I shared it in the episode where I told my story, but one was that Chris is better than me.
Right.
So my identical twin, and so that shaped a massive set of behaviors. Another one I shared around, I'm not smart enough. Right. And so it drove all this kind of behavior. So there's a host of these. And for me, there were like 17 core thoughts, core sentences that were basically running my life. And so they're also really familiar.
Right.
You know how to live with them. They seem so familiar. It's hard to imagine them anything other than true or natural.
Right.
When in fact they were just assembled over time in a passive way. And it's this act of courage to be able to, one, write them down. So look at them, get them out of your head and put them out so that they're in front of you. And in that moment already, you just separated yourself from your thoughts because you're observing them. Like you're looking at it. It's the observing you is the you, not the you who was doing the thinking or even the you writing it down. Right. You can, even if you don't take another step forward for a while, you'll start to catch your own thoughts and you'll start to observe you. And again, it's the you observing you is the you that is trying to find a voice in this thing. Right. And it creates so much space. And then it's to start to say, how can I deconstruct this? How can I change this? How can I find another way? What's an alternative? Right. I love what you just shared there as well, because we need to start to rewire our brains in that sense. Basically, another way to say, listen, you passively chose to say this to yourself. Do you want to actively choose something more constructive?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And this is where that self-worth is so important, because if you don't feel like you're worth it or deserve it, why would you change your thinking? Because actually then that thinking is running counter to how you see yourself, right?
Totally. I mean, we think we're talking to ourselves all the time. If we're honest, right? We're talking to ourselves all the time. Why not make it more positive? Yeah. Why not make it more
You could
empowering?
say anything.
You can say anything. You can choose the language. You can choose. I get that all of us, our scripts are influenced by our family of origin. What kind of home did we grow up in? And what I've discovered is, really rough background to what would you'd be considered sort of like a great traditional family. We all end up with mental head trash that we need to take to the curb. We all grow up with false, often a mixture of true and false, and it's the lies or the half truths that get us into trouble, especially the ones that again are more predominant in our life. So identifying them is a start. Beginning to reframe and identify what's a counter message that I want to be able to, when that thought comes, I need to have an argument ready for it, right? To say, no, that's not what I choose to believe. I am not fatally flawed. I am interesting and complex, right? I'm not a big personality in a negative way. No, I'm a big personality that brings people laughter and joy. The ability to counter the lie with a belief that actually empowers you. And those lies need to be challenged.
Can I?
Jump in.
I think you want those positive affirmations to be there, not just when the negative comes, but to get into that habit of reaffirming those positive scripts on a regular basis. A great book that really spoke to me along with Lovable was Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And the breaking the habit of being yourself. Of course, one of the things that he does tremendously. Why am I blanking on the author? Do you remember who?
I don't.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Good.
He talks. He has a whole section of the book is on the again how the brain is wired and the fact that you can truly rewire the brain. In fact, you can rewire the brain even when it comes to pain and all these other elements. Like there's so much the power of the brain that we have that we simply don't tap into. Words matter. And the words we say to ourselves and the scripts that we tell ourselves, and he certainly recommends as a practice. Joe Dispenza.
We were just talking about him earlier today.
Joe Dispenza.
Sorry, Joe.
He speaks about the idea of, he uses meditation as the formula for doing this, but really what he's talking about is taking time daily to set certain affirmations and to repeat them, so that less and less do the negative ones come, because the brain is rewired where the negative ones don't have space anymore.
Right. One is a reaction to fear. I need to have something to counter when a negative thought or a negative belief shows up. The other is, again, moving towards self-care, well-being, where you are reprogramming your brain with the new message. And I'll say this, we say that this whole notion of self-acceptance is so central to this living richly journey. I'll say another important element that goes right along with that is developing some sort of reflective practice. Yeah. I don't know if you can actually go on this journey of moving from perhaps a place where you have a low opinion of yourself, and you have very negative mindset in your own direction, to a more positive one, or even if you are there, you have a relatively healthy mindset, to move into then that radical self-care, radical self-actualization. I don't know if you can do any of that without some sort of reflective practice in your life where you're stopping on a regular basis, you're slowing down from the hustle and bustle, and you're reflecting on what really matters and bringing your life into alignment with it. I think, again, to borrow another Jimism, he said the number one problem with leaders today is that we're not stopping often enough to think deeply about what we're doing. So a reflective practice is, I think, foundational to this kind of work.
Yeah, it's practicing the pause.
Right.
If we go back to the story you shared when I challenged you in your moment of need, the part of that is because we have to interrupt ourselves.
Right.
So here was my friend hurting in an emotionally loaded moment, starting to form a script or to dramatically reinforce one. And I did get, I was worried for you. I didn't want that to happen. I'm like, no, that you're not broken, right? We can be hurt for sure. But, my belief is that we are whole and complete, even if we're hurt, right? That was the other thing Kelly Flanagan says is, that core sense of self, you can't break it. And you can't stain it,
right?
Which I thought was really powerful. That notion of shame. He goes, but you can sure as hell bury it.
Right.
Ooh.
Right.
And so our job. I know. He's that guy. Thank you, Kelly.
Yes.
However, very uncomfortable, but really so good. Right. I think it's one of the books I probably recommended more than any. But that notion that, there is that piece there that is, it's there and it's whole and intact. And what I didn't want for you in that moment was for you to translate any part of that into a belief that you were going to carry forward or reinforce that there's something wrong with me. Because I look and go, man, you are a great man. Right. You were really great.
Thank you.
Just inherently wonderful. You put up with us. That's part of it. But Rob's like,
that's sainthood right there. That's sainthood.
Saint Rob. We're going to call you Saint Rob.
3 miracles?
And you're in the books.
2 of them.
And you're 2 of them
right here.
You're 2/3 of the way there.
Self-love and you'll have a hat trick. Right. But that recovery is so important, right? And to be able to say, to be there with one another. As soon as people start writing this stuff down, right? And even for, I try and think about the person who is, if you feel all alone in the world, there's no one around you who's going, yeah, I'm on that journey as well. And life is shit, maybe. We don't know your circumstances. We don't control that. We don't have that. And if you're feeling all alone, I tell you, the moment you start to write this down, you also start to be in alignment with all kinds of people that maybe you're not in direct contact with yet. But this is where I say I'll trust Kelly Flanagan,
right? And
say the more you anchor into that sense of worth, your people will show up.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Your people and your community will arrive. And if in the short term it's us from a distance doing this, or you want to comment, we're going to respond back. That's for sure. Let's be part of that. But that there's alone in terms of I don't see anyone physically in front of me, and then there's alone, which is I'm the only one in the universe, and you're not that second one.
Right.
No one is.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What you said earlier about reflection. just as we talked about the idea of writing down when those negative scripts come in, this is why it's so important with those affirmations to write them down.
Right.
And to be continually, however you're reflecting every day, when we're reflecting, when we're doing that reflection, that journaling, that meditating, whatever form it takes, what we want to be doing during that time is reaffirming the positive, the accepting thoughts. A negative thought is there. That's interesting. What's the truth? What's a way I could say that and that speaks life into me? And I'm going to write that down, and I'm going to make sure that I'm journaling it in that way.
Yeah.
We're pretty well out of time for today.
No, we have infinity. Let's keep going.
Any
so negative, Rob.
Any last thoughts before we wrap up today?
He turned to Rick.
Yeah. Notice how
no last thoughts from Trevor. He's been cut off. You're cut off.
Exactly.
You're cut off.
Yeah.
I would say this. I mean, you might be listening to this, and obviously, maybe you're in a place where you're just in a really bad place mentally in terms of how you view yourself, how you speak to yourself. Maybe you're a leader listening to this and saying, "No, I'm actually pretty good." I know what's interesting is when I speak to leaders, and I think you guys would echo the same, and I think it both because out of personal experience, but also literally the thousands of conversations that we've had with leaders now, is you can always find an area of someone's life where they go from confident to not, competent to not, successful to less than successful, where they feel that they are messing up. All of us have areas of our thinking or beliefs about ourselves that need some adjustment. And so anybody will benefit from doing this type of work. It's about choosing your thoughts, choosing the way forward, and not letting the shadow forces have their way. The other thing that I would say is, again, the importance of making space in your life to do this work. A few minutes a day. If you're a worrier, you've already got the skill set, right? If you're a person that worries a lot, you've got the skill set. We're just talking now, focus your thinking on different material. The final thing I would say is, when it comes to your self-worth, when it comes to your worthiness, only you can give that to you. No one else can give it to you. And the beauty of it is, no one else can actually take it away. It is something you give yourself, and it is the most precious gift you will ever give yourself in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. My thought was similar. You're the you've been waiting for.
Right.
You don't actually need anyone else to come rescue you. It's in front of you to accept. And with that, I would encourage, be very gentle. Be very gentle with you. Your critical voice, it's trying to serve a purpose, but not in a healthy way.
Time to fire him or her.
Time to let her go, let him go. And replace it with a gentler voice that's there to support you, the same way you would with a friend you care about, a family member you care about, a child you care about, anyone. That's the voice that you need to be using with you right now. Let that voice speak loudly.
So we got a free resource for you today. Want you to have available for yourself, and it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple PDF that you can download from our website. That just is a place where you can write out your 20 affirmations. You can grab that PDF. You can open up a notebook of your own and use that. But if you do want to go there, and then also the links to the books that we're talking about, to be able to get a hold of those in case you didn't get a chance to write them down, you can go to our website, livingrichly.me. Now, we mentioned a lot of at the end of the podcast, the livingrichly.me /act. And the reason we're using that extra act at the end is a reminder that this takes action, that this takes a deliberateness. But of course, so we encourage you to go there, livingrichly.me /act. But if you just go to livingrichly.me, you'll still find the resources. But we want you to go and check out the website as a starting point to be able to access the PDF and some of the other resources.
And if you're enjoying these conversations, we invite you to subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to our YouTube channel, so that you're made aware of all the episodes as they are dropped into the world of the interweb. And we hope you'll continue to join us for these conversations.
This is a great time to share with others. We talked about feeling alone, and maybe you're the only one. It's a great moment to reach out. You might be surprised who else needs this, who else is trying to find some of these pieces that you're finding, that we're finding, that others are finding as well. So if you can think of someone that you know who they might benefit from it, give it to them as your gift to them to help them along their way. Keep sharing this.
Yeah. Thank you for spending the last hour with us. Hope that you found a lot of value out of this resource, this episode, and that you'll join us on this journey as we continue to talk about what it means for us to live richly.